Okay, we're good. Please rise. January 30th, 2023 special meeting of Haliburton County Council is now in session. Warden Liz Danielson presiding.
Good morning. Please be seated. We respectfully acknowledge that the County of Haliburton is located on Treaty 20 Nishi-Saugig territory and in the traditional territory of the Nishi-Saugig and Chippewa Nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations. We acknowledge a shared presence of Indigenous nations throughout the area and recognize its original Indigenous inhabitants as the stewards of its lands and waters since time immemorial. Could I have a mover and a seconder to adopt the agenda this morning, please? Councillors Carter and Burton.
Moved by Councillor Carter, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that the agenda for the January 30th, 2023 special meeting of Haliburton County Council be hereby approved.
All in favor? That's carried. Is there any notice of pecuniary interest or general nature thereof? Seeing none, we'll move on to our main item of business for today, and that's the review of the shoreline preservation bylaw. Just a couple of comments about this. As everyone is aware, for the public's knowledge, 3 of the 4 municipalities have also adopted the bylaw that was passed by county council, but we recognized as a county council that there was an opportunity for further discussion with the new council in place. There's a lot of information and material here, and I'm assuming that everyone has looked at it. So what I was proposing to do, but council can tell me if they like something different, was that we would ask if anyone needs clarification on anything. And Steve can provide that. And once we've received any clarifications on things, we can then move into concerns or possible changes that the new council might like to make. If that sounds reasonable. Okay, so I would ask at this point in time if anyone needs clarification on any item that's in the bylaw or any of the attachments that are there as well. Councillor Burton.
If I may, and maybe Warden, it may be premature, I'd like to just maybe bring my concerns forward about John Ewert's letter to Steve about Dysart and the 3 municipalities, which I understand from that letter will be sharing the cost on this and won't be 4. And I'm extremely concerned. Like I say, it might be premature in this of what the cost may be as we move forward and we get things in place. So I would just like to have that noted. That is one concern I do have.
Thank you. Well, we'll have to see how we make out today and whether there's going to be 3 or 4, or, you know, we can even tell that today and hone in a little bit on the costs, see where we land. Clarifications. Councillor Carter.
I think it's a comment as much as anything is the fact that, you know, for all of us, and whether it's in Dysart or in Minden, you know, we have a parking bylaw. I'm pretty certain if we went up and down the street, we couldn't find anybody who was really familiar with the parking bylaw and all of the nuances that were included. I'm pretty certain that holds true for virtually any bylaw that we have, that, you know, the general public doesn't read them or understand them. And realistically, any bylaw or any provincial government law that comes out, really it is the regulations that are important. Okay, how is it going to be applied? The whereases and the party of the first part and all those types of things are not really all that important in your day-to-day activities, but the regulations of what you have to follow and, you know, how this is going to work and so on is what's really important. So I think, you know, delving deeply into the bylaw itself is, you know, to a certain extent, it's legal speak that really is not all that meaningful. It really comes down to, what are we basically trying to do and what are going to be the rules? And so that's, I mean, I could ask for clarifications all day and I'll still probably not understand some parts of it in terms of just the way the wording has to go for a bylaw. So.
Well, and I know that we have there are some thoughts around the table about how management of the bylaw can work and they've been raised previously and I know that they'll be raised again today. So we'll get into that a little bit later on. Councillor Feary, then Councillor Dayu.
I'd just like to confirm that the tree cutting bylaw was 30 meter setback and this bylaw is 20 meters, so it's been reduced. Okay.
That is correct.
Councillor Dayu.
Thank you. That actually raises a question that I had, in addition to the one I had in my mind when I raised my hand, in follow up to Councillor Feary's question. When our OP says there's a 30 meter protection and this bylaw says a 20 meter protection, how does it work in the nesting, in the superseding OP, presumably, how does that work? And then my actual question was, is there scope currently in place, or may there be scope for within the permit to ask the applicant what offsetting activities they might have in mind? So perhaps someone wants to alter their slope, but they also intend to plant a lot of trees at the shoreline. And while that's not a like for like offset, it might be worthwhile noting that they do have certain activities in mind. Is there scope for that anywhere?
Thank you, Madam Warden, to rest of council. Good question. So that question has been answered, been asked before by even provincial regulatory agencies. And when you look at the official plan, it's sort of forward looking in the sense that it's looking towards new development. So the 30 meters really applies for new development. So for example, if we do create new lots along our lake fronts, and you'll see that most of the area municipalities will pass a zoning bylaw and they'll stipulate any cottage development has to be 30 meters back from the shoreline. So that's how the OP policy gets put into place. When it comes to the 20 meters in this bylaw, it's more geared towards the municipal act as opposed to planning act type processes, so that you're allowed a distinction there because you're dealing with two different acts. Now, when you look at the 20 meters, and this was the case that we had back in Seguin, is typically their shore road allowances are 20 meters wide. So it's a good fit. And I could see why the previous council was looking at going with the 20 meters, because it fits with the shore road allowance set up within the county now. So to answer your question about whether you can do offsetting things, that is the beauty of working with shoreline property owners, is to understand really what they want to see in terms of beautifying their properties. And it's also an opportunity for us to, as staff, to say, have you considered this as part of your ongoing living at the lake? And so, yes, you can, through the permit process, if there ever is a permit issued for something that goes beyond really what the scope of the bylaw is looking at, you can have a condition or two that suggests they do some additional landscaping in addition to putting up a rock wall, for example. Or if they want to put up a rock wall, you can ask them to stagger that rock wall back so it looks tiered from the water. And you can use the foreground in front of the rock wall as an opportunity for planting. So you can add those sort of encouragements in the permit process.
So for ease of the public's understanding, it's in essence, the 30 meter is building, the 20 meter is vegetation. Questions and clarifications? Councillor Carter.
I'm sorry, this has a long preamble to it, but
That's why we're here. Full
Yeah.
discussion.
we still have time before lunch. The I live in a large kludgy house, which had required, where we've made lots of changes and we continue to make changes. And, and I apologize for people who've heard this analogy before, but every time I need to make a change, I call up my electrician, basically explain to him what it is we want to do, or he comes over and we look at it and he says, I'll go get the permit. And I say invariably, do we really need a permit? And he goes, yes, we do. And so the process is he goes and he gets the permit. I don't even know if I sign it, or I don't remember ever seeing one, but I know that it exists. And at the end of the time when he's finished, he just tells them he's finished. Now, first of all, the process of getting the permit for him is very, very easy because they know him, they know the work that he does, and they know he does good work. In terms of the number of projects we've done, they don't come and inspect every one. And when they do, it's usually a pretty, they just ask him to say briefly what he did, and they look at it and fine. And that's because they trust him. He's a professional. He knows what he's been doing. It seems to me in this particular case, most of what I have observed on the lakes is, fairly substantial work. I mean, sure, every now and then somebody cuts down a tree that they shouldn't have cut down, or something such as that. But that's not the big, clear cutting the land and, putting in patio right down to the lake. And it's not, myself, and it's not, Walt and his neighbors and so on, and the people that have lived here for a long time. It's generally somebody who's come in, bought a small cottage, and is going to put in a large, cottage of 3,000 or 4,000 square feet or whatever it may be, or it may be a developer. No matter what it is, it's a lot of work, and it needs equipment. Generally not the stuff that you have parked in your garage. It needs heavy equipment. So therefore, you need to go to a contractor. You need to get somebody with expertise and the equipment. So I'm wondering, in all this, like back to, if I had to go out and get my electrical permit, it might be 5 days and I'd still be filling out the form. Whereas, my electrician calls up and, in a few minutes gets everything he needs to do. I'm just wondering if this is a type of situation that we have here where, there can't be more than a couple of dozen contractors that do this type of work in Haliburton County. And Steve, I don't know if you've had a situation where you've had seen something like certified vendors, where somebody comes and takes a course for a couple of days and we certify them, and then they know what they need to do. They know what needs to be permitted, what doesn't need to be permitted. They know what forms to fill out and how to fill them out. And so it's all very easy. And if it's people that we have trained and we trust, well, then we, not quite the back of the envelope drawing, but we can get a pretty approximate drawing, and we know they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And we know that they're going to follow the rules. And, we inspect them. And after a period of time, you learn that the person is, a good actor and follows the rules. So you have to, you get into a situation where, like my electrician, everything gets done very, very quickly and simply and easily. So I don't know if that's something that, not saying that we add on to this bylaw, but we add into the whole program of doing something like certifying contractors, because a couple of things happen. A, the people who complain that, wow, it's too difficult to figure out how to get these permits. Well, okay, well, go to one of the contractors who know how to do it. Two, the contractors, if they're certified, will probably end up getting more work because they'll be able to advertise that they're certified and they can get this, get things processed quickly. And I think it just makes the whole, world turn a little bit easier. So I don't know if you've had a situation like that and you could explain it.
That's
So-
actually something that that the previous council did talk about, was the possibility of certification of contractors. And personally, I think it's an excellent idea. It would help to streamline things. Comment from Mr. Stone, and then we'll go to Councillor Councillor Rail.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the rest of council. So back in Seguin, I often will refer to my days at Seguin. We had builders and contractors breakfast every spring. And so we would host a half-day training session with those who are interested in understanding our shoreline bylaws, as well as our building and Seguin processes. And we would introduce them to our 3 bylaws, what it was like to build sustainably along the shoreline. And towards the end of my tenure there, we actually developed waterfront design guidelines. And so we introduced them to our seminar with the contractors then. We hadn't got to the point of officially certifying them, but through that exercise, we developed quite a good rapport with a handful of contractors. And, when you have people who want to work with you and do good, sustainable work, we found that we could, they trusted us, that we trusted them, and it allowed us to review their plans much more quicker, because at least they understood what sustainable development was. And I think through the 5 years that we were doing that, we only had one occurrence where we approved a plan and then we were called on site to find out that it wasn't built accordingly. And after some discussion with the property owner and the contractor, it came to light that there was a scope change halfway through the project. And sadly, we had to tell both of them that they had outstepped the limits of their approvals, and we had to deal with them in a remedial action afterwards. But for 5 years, it was very productive. And it all started with the building and Seguin workshop. So that could be something that we could bring to bear here as well.
Would we be in a position to actually certify them?
Certainly, is it like getting your certification as a building inspector, that sort of thing? Probably not. It would just be something that the county would do to say, you've gone through our program, here's your certificate. And let's go like MasterCard, membership has its privileges, so it would be treated like that, where, if you go through the program and you spend 2 days, you do your materials, and you use that in your planning for your landscape projects, then yes, you could, it's easier for us then to say, yes, they've been through the program. We can look at their projects and then give them approvals quickly, or even better, exempt them quicker. And again, I want to stress that the bylaw is really set up for exemptions. And so that would be the real benefit of anybody going through a program like that. They can self-teach themselves and then help their clients out along on the waterfronts. So,
Councillor Royale, then Fury, then Diane.
First off, I totally support the whole idea of coming up with some kind of a licensing or accreditation or something that says, I know enough about this stuff that I can actually make it happen. But kind of sort of a little bit on what Councillor Carter was saying, I built my own home. I had the excavation done myself. I had someone else put the well in. I had someone else put the foundation in. I put my own septic system in. I put my own wiring. I did all my own plumbing. I did it all. I did the insulation, I did the everything. Now, there's a few more inspections that you have to go through when you're doing it in a private citizen, but nevertheless, it can be done. Having said that, if there was a course or a program that I could have taken on how to build a home legally and effectively, it would have helped me a lot. So in addition to doing this for the contractors, if you have people that are a little bit more hands-on and capable of doing it, they should also be able to take the course and follow the same basic general instruction. Why am I saying that? Because it knocked over $40,000 off the cost of my build. And I wasn't in a rush to build. So I was able to phase it. And if I didn't know something, I found out about it and I built it. But every time I went to a certain point, I had the inspections done but there was a couple that I had to get done because I was doing it myself that otherwise we couldn't do. So I'm kind of hoping that when we come down the road that we don't restrict it so that only contractors can do this. We're not interested in making sure that contractors, although I hope the contractors get work, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to make sure at the end of the day that we place an unfair burden on the cost of doing this stuff to the actual landowners. And at the same time, we keep the integrity of the bylaw in place. So I'm hoping that when we do this, we set it up so that the average citizen can also get educated and allowed to do the job.
Mr. Stone.
So just to your point, our seminar was open to the public as well. So we did have would-be builders as well who wanted to do their own construction stuff. So they were welcome to attend. It was a free seminar, so there wasn't any cost burden associated with that. So.
Councillor Fury, then Dayu, then Burton.
Well, first of all, I think it's a good idea. I'd be a little nervous certifying because if we know that all contractors don't do everything perfectly. And what happens when something happens? They build a set of steps down to the lake, somebody falls and sues, and we certify them. Guess who's going to be in on the insurance claim? We are as county. So I think there is a way of doing it. Probably I will propose that at the end of the day. And I think it's a great idea, but I don't know that we want to go as far as certifying. And I hear Councillor Ryan's idea about you don't want to limit it so people can't do their own. And we do have the last few years here since the boom's on. I see so many outside contractors in here working. It's not just locals that do this. So anyway, that's my concerns.
Councillor Dayu.
Thank you. I do like that idea very much. I absolutely take on board what Councillor Fury is saying about the certification. I wonder if there is simply a word selection with a definition that would allow us to show what it is we mean by what we're doing that would help to offset that possibility. Because I think that's a very wise comment to make. I do think there's probably a solution there. My question, Mr. Stone, would be, could we foresee in such a certification program, which is geared to extending exemptions, could we see the prospect of hiring only one bylaw officer instead of two at the get-go, and then as needed, perhaps hiring another one in the future? We've got some key budget concerns coming up. Obviously, we want to do this in a step-by-step way. Do you think we could actually knock off one of those new hires?
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of the council. So when this program started, the thought process was that there would be 3 people involved. And then after looking at it really seriously and thinking about council's concerns about extra staffing and things like that, what I did is I took a look at how the job descriptions were laid out initially. And then I brought about combining the skill sets into going from 2 positions into 1. So as it's laid out now, the bylaw compliance officers, I like to call them, also are plans examiners. So they have they're a double hatter. And so they can do 2 things. They can do in office work and in field work. So the 2 of them could do that. That being said, when I first thought of that idea, It was to do all 4 municipalities. So at the present time, we have 3. So if that's how we're going to proceed, then it may be that we look at only having 1 person like that. The other luxury we have is we have at least 2 people in the department already who I envision will be sworn in as a bylaw compliance officer. That would be myself. And it also would be Adam. He worked with me at Seago, and we had that role at that municipality. So there's a possibility that we have others in the office that can do some of this work. And we haven't decided the disposition of our current forester, who's actually doing shoreline bylaw enforcement now. So we're really at council's disposal when it comes to looking at this program and how we might implement it from a staffing standpoint. But there are contingencies, shall we say, with regards to, the luxury of having very qualified people already in the planning department.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you. My question is probably more directed at James sitting behind you there, but to Councillor Carter's point of certifying contractors, do you not work with certified contractors pretty well every day of your life? That are, maybe I'll use for example, even a crown cut.
It's a different world, I guess, in forestry, yes. One of the routes for having work done is strictly professional, and we have another stream for those who want. But I'm not sure it's really comparable to the situation for construction.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I think that it's probably a good idea not to use the word certification. It's a great idea, but it's probably, to Councillor Dayu's point, it's probably we'll have to come up with our own name for going through, a 1-day or 2-day seminar. You get a certificate, but it's not really certification as you might find in the forestry business, or being a contractor to frame a house, for example, where you go through a college program and you end up with a diploma in that regard. So,
Councillor Burton.
Just if I may, Warden, with my business and what I had to do, I had to be licensed. I was licensed by the province. Could we think or consider a license for the contractors? And I was a contractor.
Through you, Madam Warden, to the rest of council, yes, you could. I don't know if we would be there at the beginning of the program. I think what we would probably try to do is to establish that 1 or 2-day training seminar off season and allow contractors to come into that, and then they would get some sort of diploma, if you want to say, for going through that, but it wouldn't be the same strength as it would be with licensing. But we certainly can explore what it might take to establish a licensing program, and that would have to involve discussion with the local contractors.
Councillor Rael, then Dayu.
First off, I totally agree with the conversation that we're having, but I'm kind of wondering, could we change everything to the word approved so that we don't spend all afternoon debating this, and we can talk about this as a separate issue when we get to how we're going to license, permit, whatever we're going to do. So if we just use the word generic word approved for the time being, to say that we've all agreed that whatever process we use will be approved by the county, and that way we can kind of keep this part of it short. Just my suggestion.
Councillor Dayu.
I was about to get right into those weeds to suggest credentials, which is a very vague term that doesn't really imply something as specific as certification, but to your point, I think that's something that I'm sure our staff would be happy to think through and come back with the appropriate terminology. I do have a further question for clarification, actually, but I don't mean to interrupt the flow on this approve / credential / certification discussion.
Great. Carry on.
Okay, great. For clarification, Steve, would you kindly talk me through how upper tier and lower tier would speak to each other in those cases where there would be a building permit overlap? And I'm referring specifically to in the bylaw, general section 5.3a, it is said, this bylaw does not apply to activities and matters undertaken to demolish, repair, enlarge, replace, or construct a building pursuant to a building permit issued under the Building Code Act, provided the activity or matter is lawful, required to achieve construction of the building or structure, and meets the intent of this bylaw. So I guess it's that final bit that meets the intent of this bylaw and how that shaking of hands works. The example I have in mind is, say there is someone with a 150-year-old cabin fairly close to the shoreline. They want to raise it, dig a basement, and stick it back down. In order to raise it, they need to get in big machines. And in order to get those big machines, then they really need to kind of clear cut. But the activity itself is permittable under a building permit. So how do our building officials at lower tier shake hands with the bylaw to make sure everything works?
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of the council. So we had at Seguin, we had a very strong relationship with our building inspectors. So it was about just happened to be in the same department headed by me. So there was a lot of ongoing dialogue about building permit activities and shoreline sustainable development on the shoreline. So to shake hands with the local building inspectors, there would be, just as we would host training for the general public as well as the contractors, we would do the same with our building inspectors to educate them in what we're looking for in terms of sustainable shorelines and how they can issue building permits and be the eyes on the ground, basically, when a cottage is being raised up, for example. Now at Seguin, we would allow for up to 3 meters of disturbance around a foundation. Here it was 5 meters. So the expectation is that the CBO would be aware that, if they needed to put foundation in and they had to use excavators to do that, they could disturb the perimeter of the construction up to 5 meters. And that would still be permissible in terms of the shoreline bylaw. Now, let's say, for example, they did clear cut the whole shoreline. Building inspector goes out there and says, well, that's well outside the scope of what they really required to do the addition or to raise the cottage, then we would have a violation on our hand. And hopefully the CBO would be responsible enough to provide us with that information. We'd have to start an investigation. But to your question, we are really hoping that we educate all municipal employees, the public, et cetera, to understand what sustainable development is and how they can work within that, even when it comes to issuing building permits.
Councillor Rail.
Steve, if you don't mind my refreshing myself on the conversation that we had, you and I and Adam had. I asked the exact same question to Steve at that particular point in time. And Steve, you gave exactly the same answer, except I'm going to add something that you explained to me. And that was that at the time when we brought it up, it was still an issue and try to figure out how to do that. And I believe at the time you indicated that you would like prior to April 1st to meet with all of the CBOs and the planning for the entire municipality, county, and then look at that particular challenge itself and say, how can we develop relationships and various communication that may or may not currently be in place. If they're in place, then work on them. And if they're not in place, develop them. Would that be a fair translation of what we talked about?
Through you, Madam Chair, to the rest of council, yes. And our first opportunity actually to explore that will happen with the planners. We have a meeting scheduled for next week. And so looking at the shoreline, sustainable shoreline development from a planning perspective is something that we plan to discuss. So I didn't say this in my last response, but for example, if you require minor variance to sort of raise that cottage at the, let's call it 15-meter mark, and it's our hope to educate the area planners to say, when they look at that type of activity, assess the shoreline for its sustainability. Is it a well-treed lot or is it a barren lot? And it may be that and you can apply conditions of approval to minor variances that, let's say it is a well-treed lot that they, as part of the issuance of that minor variance, they have a tree protection plan so that they can identify what trees are going to come down within the 5 meters and the other ones that are going to be protected. So again, that's one way that we can deal with that. So first thing, to Councillor Rao's point, is we'll initiate that with the planners next week.
So is there the ability for a committee of adjustment to add that kind of requirement to their approval?
Madam Chair, yes, there is. We used to do it all the time in Seguin. And it was one of those balancing acts that, applicants wanted to beautify their shorelines, and that usually meant a new addition, extra bedroom, bigger deck. And we would say, great, but can you plant 2 or 3 trees over in this corner? Because that will help naturalize the shoreline. So yes.
Questions, comments? Councillor Dayu.
Well, I guess that speaks to my first question about the scope of permitting and whether an activity like that is something that we could make room for in the permit itself, so that those people who have ideas to offset their work have an opportunity to say so. And for those who haven't thought that through, maybe they would start to think that through, because here's a big empty box on the permit that they perhaps don't want to leave blank when they could do something. I'm just wondering if there's scope to solidify that a bit.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of council. So the answer is yes. A classic example would be at Seguin, we actually issued building permits for dock structures. I understand some, if not all, the municipalities here in the county do not issue permits, building permit for dock structures. So that would mean they would have to come to the county potentially for a dock permit. I had a gentleman, for example, call me the other day, and he said, well, I want to build this dock, but I need to put a concrete pad for it on the shoreline. So I said to him, well, that wouldn't under our bylaw be exempt because it's an artificial change to the shoreline, introducing concrete. I said, however, we could look at it from a sustainability standpoint and would require a site inspection. And if we were out there and looking at a shoreline to say, okay, if to sort of hide that, could you introduce some low-lying vegetation in and around the concrete platform so you can't see it from the water line? So in issuing our building permit, that would be a condition to introduce, a couple bushes on either side of the concrete. And the family would be enjoying their dock, and you wouldn't be able to see the concrete footings. So
I'm looking for other questions or concerns about where we're at right now. Thoughts? I don't hear any changes. I mean, we're looking at what we've got in place right now. I guess I'm looking to Councillor Fury to see if you've got any comments.
Okay, you asked for it.
I did.
My comments focus around the center of the bylaw to deal with future violations. And my read of the bylaw, they do nothing on the issue that over 50% and under the 50% threshold, there's going to be any improvement. So in other words, we've accepted the fact when we pass this bylaw that we're going to move forward, which is typically what we do with bylaws. But then on the other hand, we're not going to do anything to go back and fix 50% or the 50 under 50 that are polluting the lake and allowing everything to run in. So that's the focus that I have here. And I'm just going to make some facts clear here that CHA Lake Health Report suggests that 1/3 of the study shows 1/3 of our waterfront lots are under 70% naturalization. That's a lot of property. Love Your Lake states and suggests that the focus should be on the naturalizing ground shorelines below 50%. This bylaw does absolutely nothing to correct that. This bylaw moves forward with new applications. It will catch the odd one that comes in and they're tearing the cottage down, like my colleague said, and they're building a new one. But there's another way to do that. Let's look at the tree cutting bylaw, 160 complaints in 3 years. If I read this correctly, there was probably 16 charges and I'm not sure of that. So if the tree cutting bylaw is on it, it's a complaint driven bylaw. And that's the number of complaints we've had in 3 years on the tree cutting bylaw. What makes that, how do we know that's going to be any different with the shoreline bylaw? And on top of that, is the tree cutting bylaw still with Mr. Rogers? Or are we going to have the expertise on staff to decide to go into the bush and tell somebody how to manage a forest? So those are questions that I have, and council need to know that before they pass this budget. This bylaw has been evolving here for 5 years, folks. And do you actually think that anybody that wanted to get the shoreline done that had a reason to probably violate what would be the bylaw, do you not think a lot of that's already done? And now we're not going to address that because that's history again. Another issue with the bylaw, it treats people who have not purchased their shore road allowance differently. It appears it would be technically, the way I read it, and legally, you would need to get township approval to enter the prohibited area to cut down weeds even or dead tree limbs. Now, isn't that going to be nice for the townships? Now, people won't do it, but the fact is it's illegal the way the bylaw is written. I don't want to leave here today without offering an alternative to hundreds of thousands of hours of staff time, consulting fees. I don't know what the amount of that is, and the future cost of probably 2.5 years. And make no mistake about it, the size of this county, it'll be $400,000 or $500,000 in 2 or 3 years. There's no doubt about it. You're going to have 3 or 4 staff working on it. It's going to take 1 or 2 vehicles. And but I still think we need to go after the problem, and the problem can be dealt with another way. And I'm concerned about the bylaw, and my council's concerned about it because they don't think it's addressing the issue that is forefront here. If we're trying to clear the lakes, and God bless you, Madam Warden, for having a special meeting on Airbnb, that's a nightmare. And that's the main thing we need to deal with. So how would we address this? Well, first of all, we need a major education program. We need to speed up and enhance the septic reinspection program. That's critical. That's what's hurting the lakes. I propose that we engage Trent or Sir Sanford Fleming to put on courses for the contractors. I don't know, would it be 2 days or a week? And at the end of the day, they'll get a certificate the same way that septic inspectors do. It's no liability on the county, but they have it. And this is what Bob has suggested, or Councillor, my colleague has suggested here, that would be it would kind of be a tool that would give owners and staff some confidence that it's being done by trained individuals. We need to find a way to dramatically increase fines on the tree cutting bylaw. It's a joke. I mean, it's just like the police charging somebody and they beat them home after they put them in jail, because the teeth that are in it now, I think it's under the Small Offences Act, and I think the last I heard was an $850 fine for someone, and they plant these 2-foot-high shrubs. So there's no teeth in it. And the people we have moving into the area have lots of money. They'll pay the fine and they'll plant the trees, but that doesn't solve the problem. So we need to find a way, and I would do this legally. We would have to do it legally, find a way to dramatically increase those fines. And I think we can do that by including it as a license or whatever it takes. And I'm not sure, I don't have the answer for that. We should require as a requirement that MNRF and Fisheries and Oceans approval we see that whenever it's required. And I don't think we're doing that now. The building permit application.
I just wonder if, because you're going through a number of points here, I wonder if we can kind of deal with the first couple and then move on.
Let's go back.
So that we're,
Yeah.
so I think the first issue that you could maybe speak to, Steve, is the going forward with the bylaw and looking at how we deal with, I think you're talking about restoration of properties that are already been mismanaged. Can you speak to that, Steve? I mean, I do think we've spoken quite a bit about the need for education programs, but that doesn't force people to restore.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of the council. So, with us starting this program, yes, it's a bylaw first approach to it. But as we deal with individuals when they phone in, as I mentioned, that gentleman with the dock question, that's an excellent opportunity for us to educate him and his family with regards to sustainable shoreline development. As a matter of fact, I explained to him, yes, that's, when you put your dock in, what we're trying to do is maintain that you have in excess of 75% of your shore retained as a natural area. So hopefully your path down to your dock will be no greater than 5 meters, because that's the intent of the bylaw. So you can take those opportunities through the existing shoreline bylaw to educate people who own properties. And when you talk about dealing with the properties that are already wouldn't be considered a sustainable shoreline, we at Sequin, we had sort of like a Love Your Lake program. It was actually a dock flag program that if you brought your property back into more sustainable looking environment, you would get issued a flag, so you could wave it proudly at the edge of your dock. So there are programs out there that are not really tailored to the shoreline bylaw right now, but the county can consider those things. We also, when you look at Muskoka District, they do have a component as part of their lake health program, which council is considering developing themselves. They actually do have, they hire summer students to go out and do shoreline assessments. And they also provide incentives for those who do have degraded shorelines to apply and get monies so that they can go out and buy natural plant stock and revegetate their shorelines. Through the course of any sort of inspection work, again, that when we're meeting out on site, we have an opportunity to again discuss what we think is appropriate shoreline activity. James can attest to this. He had we met on site and discussed that with potential property owners for about an hour and a half. So we explained to him what we're trying to do when it comes to sustaining the shoreline. We gave them examples actually across the lake. There's probably 8 cottages, and we identified ones that weren't in compliance and some that were totally in compliance because you can see the cottage. And then what James did as well, it was well outside the scope of his responsibilities, but he went with the tree removal contractor and helped identify trees outside the 30 meters that were suspect and should be removed for safety's sake. So to your point, I think looking at developing a program, that would be sort of an extension of the lake health program where you, the county could look at developing a program where they can help property owners bring their properties back into a sustainable looking environment. But certainly this bylaw doesn't do that. It actually is serving for regulatory purposes. So,
I'm wondering about the question that Councillor Ferry rose about fees and fines. Is there any way that we can work with that system? I know that we've tried to do that previously with the tree cutting bylaw and had no success through the province. But I wonder if there's anything we can do, because that seems to be one of the problems that we have. Wealthy people developing their property don't care about a $900 fine. They're more than willing to pay the fee and carry on with what they want to do. And so I'm just wondering if you can see any route to improving that.
well, you're absolutely right, Madam Chair, that we when it comes to setting ticket fines, we're at the leave of the judge who's reviewing the applications. That would be part 1 ticket offenses. So, when James shows up on the site and somebody's cut down too many trees, he has the opportunity at that point to issue a ticket. And it, I think all told, it's about $930 once you consider all the various taxes and fees that get associated with. But yes, it's not a large sum for total destruction of the shoreline. But there is the part 3 approach, which is actually to go to a judge and say, we do have a dramatic destruction that happened, and we want to proceed with a summons to court for the violator to appear in court. And so in that realm, you do have opportunities for larger sums. So for a private individual, it could be up as high as 50,000. For a corporation, it's 100,000. And then you also, let's say the bylaw compliance officer goes out there a second day, then there's also the opportunity for continuance of those fees for every day that the violation has been observed. But you do have to go to court, and you have to present your evidence and stand the test of scrutiny from the property owner's lawyers and so on, and hopefully you get a favorable decision. So, and this is going way back in my experience. a good friend of mine, he was responsible for bylaw enforcement. And I said, just get your $1, because that's all he could get. And I said, okay, next time this guy violates by filling in the wetland, take him to court and ask for the max. And sure enough, second violation, he did get the max, $50,000 charge. So there is ways, but to get the larger fines, it has to be a gross negligence, infraction of the bylaw. And it does require some time to go to court. And again, present your evidence in such a way that it's convincing so that the judge does levy a significant fine. Now, the other thing too, and we had this in Sebring, where we did go to court, but we also got a court order for rehabilitation of the disturbed shoreline. And at the end of the day, it was quite a dramatic restoration, but it was $5 million worth of restoration that we acquired. But the beauty of it was court ordered, which meant if it didn't get done, the property owner was in contempt of court. So, and it took 5 years finally to be restored. But it was that can happen. They do take those ones do take time to go through the court system.
I see a couple of hands up. I just want to make sure that they're in relation to the points that Councillor Fury has raised. So we will start with Councillor Dayu, then Rael, then Burton.
Thank you. I did want to address Councillor Fury's concerns about this bylaw not going back and looking at the current bad practices. That is the most valid comment I think you could possibly make. The brunt of our problem is in what exists currently. I could not agree with you more. But the way that I've understood the bouncing ball of logic for this bylaw, and this is where I look to Steve and Mike to tell me if I've misunderstood this. For me, this bylaw is a planning instrument. And a planning instrument, the way I've conceptualized it, is a document that regulates development. So it's something that offers structure around how development goes forward. So for me, education, incentives, social pressure, all of those softer, yet perhaps even more crucial elements, they belong here, but I don't see them as belonging in this bylaw myself. I would agree with Steve that would be affixed more to a broader lake health program, that we could put a lot of emphasis on behavior change. And that is, behavior change is something that can't exist in a bylaw. That's not a planning instrument. So I fully respect that need, and I agree with you. In fact, I think one of the frustrations I've had as a witness these last 5 years has been to see how the regulatory piece has come before, almost exclusively before, the softer yet as important public education, social change, behavioral change piece. Maybe if those pieces had been reversed, we would have a slightly less contentious outcome in the public. I don't know, but here we are now. I do think that the bylaw should remain a planning instrument for clarity, and we should go full out on the lake health portion to address all of the other behavioral change elements that don't fall into a planning instrument itself.
Thank you. Councillor Rael.
Yeah, the thing too is that many of the things that are being brought up now were brought up before. And we had, when it came to promotion, we had an unbelievable advocate who just believed that everything should be promoted on this thing. And God bless, she was absolutely right. There's also 14 attachments to this thing. And inside those attachments, there are the drafts of what could happen if we choose to go in that particular route. And the one that come to which we were talking about right now is attachment 5, which is related to compliance and enforcement. Okay, it's a draft program. It can be updated. It can be changed to whatever we want it to turn into. We've got 7, which is a plain language translation of this thing so that an average person can understand what it is that we are talking about. And then we have 8, which is a self-screening program. And that is to say, do I need a permit? Do I need to go down this road? Where do I need to go? And then you have the 11, which is the actual promotion and education attachment, which is related to, and I believe there's actually an example of something that we could use there. Operative word being example. This is not the final product. This is why I think when I was one of the last to agree to doing this. And my argument since we started was, how's it going to work? And Councillor Carter, I'm right on board with you. It's great to put all this stuff into a bylaw, but if you don't know how it's going to work, if you don't know how you're going to promote it, if you don't know how you do any of that kind of stuff, then at the end of the day, we're just wasting time. So I totally hear what Councillor Ferry is saying, and that those 3 items have already been identified. They're on a list of things, and I'm sure Mr. Stone is going to be looking into those issues. And I think our problem right now is we want to jump ahead of the amount of time it's going to take to develop that kind of stuff. And I think it's just going to take time. We want to introduce it in April. So there's a lot of time between now and April to investigate those issues, create a draft 2 of what we have here. And then I'm kind of hoping that between April and July, which would be the first quarter after that, we do a beta test to this whole thing and then come back in July and review it. Did we promote this thing properly? Did we inform people effectively? And if that's not what we're going to do, then you know, your argument is very valid. We're not going to go a whole long way with this thing. But I think that this is where we need to go. We need to start looking at the education programs and the stuff like that. But yeah, it's stuff that we need to do.
I think we've agreed that the bylaw itself needs a review process. I'm not sure that that's enough time. But you know, we've all been in agreement, and I think that the documents even include the requirement for review. I wanted to touch on, before I get to you, Councillor Carter, I just wanted to touch on the issue of incentives, because from time to time we've talked about how do we encourage people to restore their properties, those properties that have already been damaged to some extent. And you know, I mean, those are the sorts of things that need some creativity, because you know, we're all struggling with a budget that's challenging, and you know, it's my experience that incentives cost money. Now, you know, there could be other ways to go about it, but you know, that's something that we do need to think about going down the road, because it has come up time and time again in all of the correspondence that we've received from people. Just on one other point that you'd made about septic inspections and the need to continue with that, I'm pretty sure that all 4 municipalities are set on moving forward with septic inspection. How we do it, who we do it with, you know, might be another point, but you know, I'm hearing some pretty positive moving forward with that. So we'll go to, oh, I know, I wanted to ask one more question about the feasibility of working with Trent or Fleming on some kind of course. Is that something that we might be able to do? Councillor Carter, you have a response to that?
Well, absolutely. We've got ULinks, which is already here and already working with us, and you know, is affiliated with Trent and with Fleming, and with the people that you need to talk to for that sort of thing. So you know, ULinks could be utilized to do training as an example, or to you know, get you in dealing with the right people at Trent and Fleming.
Back to, I believe, Councillor Burton.
Seems like my question's way back when, but I'm just, I was going to get back to when the conversation was going on about trees and fines and a slap on the wrist for what we're charging. And I guess my question would be to James. I hate to do this to you, James, but do you not have a mechanism in place with what you do? If I happen to be logging and I get over in somebody else's property and I cut a couple big pine trees down, for example, what is the process then?
I came here for crowd control today, so I.
Sorry, and I probably shouldn't direct it through Steve to you.
Defer to Steve.
Is there not a, and I apologize for this, and
The
it probably,
problem with asking James a question is he doesn't have a microphone
Uh,
and the public can't hear him.
all right, well, I'll see if I can possibly
Oh,
have
we've
Steve.
got a solution to that.
And again, James, I apologize, but I'll start again. Is there not a mechanism in place for you with what you do? If I happen to trespass, I'm in the bush logging and I cut down a couple trees on somebody else's property. And it's happened, and is there not a pretty hefty fine, and is there not restoration that has to be done as well?
Yes, those are options under our current forest conservation plan.
Do you know off the top of your head what the fine is?
Well, if it's our one process, we're limited in the same way as we are with the other bylaws, so maximum the province could grant us would be $1,000. And then there's the option of part of three, the state that's going to perhaps more appropriate for second. It's like, yeah, $50,000.
Thank you.
I believe it's back to you, Councillor Carter.
So I wanted to address what Councillor Ferry was speaking about, and I'll have to say that, yes, I agree. I think though, we have to be taking this in a number of different steps. I don't think we can concentrate too much on what's not in this bylaw. There's nothing that talks, at various times during your debates, for those of you who were on council, you were talking about, pesticides and agrochemicals and all sorts of different things that were problematic for the lake. I think that, yes, this is going forward. If we put in this bylaw, it takes place today, and it governs how we go forward on things. I disagree that that most of the lakes are developed, because we're in this position right now where we're getting the transition of grandma and grandpa's cottage is being left to the estate, and no one grandchild can afford to buy out the rest, and so on and so forth. So we're getting a turnover on these cottages. And, once again, grandma and grandpa's cottage is to the new owner is not exactly what they're looking for. And so, they're going to start building something that is much bigger. The second part of the issue, I think, is I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but, these short-term rental locations, there are some people who feel the best monies they're going to make is if they turn these into something that looks like a resort, which has the stone patios right down to the water's edge. So I think that there's still an awful lot of property that is going to be, if not developed, is going to be redeveloped and be covered with this bylaw. In terms of the other issues, I think the septic is we have a separate program, and it's up to us to make sure that we follow through with that. And it doesn't need to be in this one. Let me talk about the restoration. It's very difficult to go to somebody who has done something legally and then tell them they have to now go back and change that. And I can tell you, as being part of the Lake Association for many years, we had a program where we were both educating, going to people who were particularly, if you will, in violation of the goals of having the natural shorelines. We had a subsidy program where we were actually, paying for people to restore their shorelines. We're giving them consulting as to how to do it. And over a period of 4 years, say, we got 3 people to take us up on it. And, Cash has got a lot of cottages on it, so and a lot of them, were potentially eligible. So it's more than just education. People have got to wanna, and that's something that's pretty difficult to change, and it's almost a generational change. A new way of thinking, in the world and life. But we're not going to do this with education, just like we didn't get people to quit smoking or just wear seatbelts or anything like that. It just isn't. Education is part of it, but it needs to have something else. So I'm so much would want us to get this done and in place, so that we can then concentrate on the other things, which would include the restoration and, whatever the Love Your Lake is and so on. But we need to get, I think we need to get this step, I don't know, say out of the way, but, into place, so that we can then work on the other things. We're not going to make everything perfect overnight. But, if we take the steps in the right direction, I think that's going to be benefit to us in the long term.
So are there, I'm just going to see if there are any other comments about the points that you've raised so far, and then come back to you if that's okay. I see Councillor Shell.
I would agree with many things that Councillor Ferry has brought up this morning. And but I also, as Councillor Carter has said, I see this as a working, living document. And I think in order to put in place the things that Councillor Ferry and Councillor Dayu have spoken to this morning, we need something in place to do that. So I'm after the length of time I've sat here listening to everything that's, within this proposed document and what staff has brought to us, I'm prepared to move forward, keeping in mind that it is something that can be changed later, etc. But again, I'm going to say that I think it's very important, if possible, that we all buy into this.
Back to you, Councillor Ferry.
Okay, just a quick question for Steve Stone there. When I was searching, I found out I couldn't find. I know there's reference in the county bylaws and the district bylaws to shoreline, but I couldn't find any other than municipalities that are enforcing the tree cutting or the shoreline bylaw. I can't see any upper tier governments doing it. And there's a reason for that. But anyway, I want to hear your answer.
Go ahead.
So you're speaking outside of the realm of this county, you mean?
Yeah, other
Yeah.
counties that do it.
Yeah, so in other jurisdictions, it may be regulated by a conservation authority who have
Right.
their fill and flood regulations. And so you'll often see those municipalities. Now that's going to be coming to an end with the changes that the provincial government is doing. So, and it may be that that gets passed down to either local municipalities, yes.
But the conservation authorities, they overlap into more than one county sometimes.
That's true.
But my question is, there is no upper tier government that I'm aware of that has a shoreline preservation bylaw. I couldn't find one, and there's a reason for that. Do you know any that?
No, to my knowledge,
No, I
no.
don't think there is one.
But there is the ability for the lower tiers to give authority to the upper tier to do it. And I think that there's a way to work together on that.
It's pretty obvious why they're not doing it. It's geography, because it costs way more to truck from Minden to Cardiff Lake or to up in your area, Jennifer. I'm still a firm believer that we can do a lot of this stuff under our building bylaw. Those building applications indicate what, and Councillor, my colleague is absolutely right here. Grandma and grandpa are selling the cottage or they're giving it to the kids. But you know what? that's the time when we have that building application and we do a separate questionnaire. And you know what? That's the time to naturalize the shoreline. When they tear that little 24 by 32 down or whatever it is, have them do some restoration. But even when they put an addition on. Now, what about people with boathouses? I don't see boathouses being dealt with in this shoreline bylaw. What's the policy there? Like, you allow boathouses? Do you not? You did.
It's my better judgment.
Well, I know, but you still do it. That has to have some impact on the shoreline. You know, there's so many things here that, in my opinion, if we had, and Dysart will be pursuing this, I am sure, at another time maybe, but there is a way, I think, and I believe, I talked to a couple of legal people about it, to put some teeth into the tree conservation bylaw by including it in as a license, the same as you did here under site plan control. Site plan control can do that and put the fines up to discourage that. But these things take a little bit of time. And I've just been working on this for a little bit. But I'm concerned that we're going to put something in place. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's infringing on some people's rights because if you didn't own your shoreline, which 75% of the people in Dysart don't, then you technically got to go to the township to take a dead limb down. That's the law. That's in the bylaw. So until those things are addressed, I'm sorry, but I think it's very expensive, and I don't think it's well founded. Now, to say the county can pass it if they're delegated authority, that's true. But then who's going to do it? And are these people qualified? Are they qualified? We can hardly find a bylaw officer now. Where are you going to find these qualified people? I got concerns about the cost and about if it's going to accomplish what it intended to do. And when so many people are in violation and we got an opportunity here under the building process to try and correct that, to me, it's a no-brainer. We just need 2 or 3 things resolved.
I guess my question would be, can we actually control it through the building application process? Mr. Stone, can you respond to that?
With regards to the question about emergency work, so emergency work actually is defined in the bylaw. So I'm just going to read that for you. Because I had this question a few weeks back. It says emergency work means any work required where the likelihood of a tree failure is imminent and a tree or part of a tree poses a risk to in which there is a threat to public health and safety and or a threat to property. So if you look at the exemptions, that's in section 5 are the exemptions, and 5.5 is sort of the catch-all. It's my get out of jail free exemption if I have to use it. It says no person shall place, dump or dump any fill, alter the grade of land, or injure or destroy a tree in a prohibited area. So to your comment, Councillor Fury, to publicly owned shore roads. So if the property owner doesn't own that, it's technically in a prohibited area. So it says unless the authority, unless the activity exempt from this bylaw through federal or provincial legislation. So in that case, that would be something like provincial would be if you were to, and this happens a lot at the province where they build a highway through a wetland, right? So they're exempt from this bylaw if they wanted to build a highway through a wetland. Or constitutes emergency work. So if a person doesn't own their shore road allowance, yet they are afraid that the tree is going to collapse and hit their dock and their boat, then they can remove it if it's a risk to property or person. So there is an exemption in there that allows that to happen. So,
I read it.
yeah. Yeah. No, but I mean, the one thing I would say is that part of our service to the community is to field those types of calls and questions and give those types of answers. So, like I said, with the gentleman who called me, he was referred to me by Minden's building department about the dock, and we gave him the answer in that regard. So, to answer the question about whether or not building permit can actually regulate shoreline alteration, they can only regulate it in regards to what is required to satisfy the requirements of a building permit. So I don't know if there is. Oh, that's true. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But how would that change anything?
Then when they got a building application, whether it was for an addition to the boathouse or an addition to the bunkie, to go on, they'd be on site to see that, and they'd say, but sir, you need some help with your shoreline naturalization. That isn't going to happen now.
But I still don't see how you can do that under the building permit process.
Well, the building permit triggers the shoreline bylaw, which would be at the lower tier as well. That's why other municipalities are doing it that way, I believe. I'm talking to a couple. Anyway.
I see some. Well, I mean, I'm sure you still have more points that you want to make, but
I just think it's just, I don't want to be nitpicky about this. The big point is that we're not dealing with the past efficiently as we could be. And I think there's other ways of doing it that are going to be more efficient. That's my point. And I really don't have much more to say about it.
I see Councillor Dayu and Councillor Rael. Comments?
I have faith that we can work on the past in the future and through other means. I agree with others around the table who have said this bylaw is the first step working towards a vision of what we want in our county. But it's only one piece, and it can't be everything. So and it is necessary. I do believe it is necessary. And I fully take on board what Councillor Carter said. You know, yes, there's a lot of stuff in the past, but there are a ton of folk who are taking over cottages and who want to make those changes. So indeed, I fully see what Councillor Carter is saying in that regard, which makes me think even more so, you know, how necessary this piece is. But I do have faith that all of those concerns that you have can be addressed and will be addressed by this table in the future. To Councillor Rael's point about the review process, I would make two comments. One, absolutely agree, a review is required. Happy to know that it's already in the document. I would say that July is nowhere near adequate time. I would be looking at 2 to 3 years before a review could possibly take place, which is evidence-based. And my suggestion to one and all would be, let us help our planning department by feeding them from the get-go the sorts of information that we would want to see as part of that review, so that they can collect that data and come up with that kind of evidence in 2 or 3 years, rather than waiting 3 years to say, oh, but what about this? And they'd had no means of doing that. I'm not suggesting we do that today, but I think it would be courteous to say these are the sorts of things that we would like to see in 3 years to be able to assess whether this is working, whether we're missing anything, et cetera, et cetera. Those are my points.
Councillor Rael.
Yeah, first off, thank you for that. And I want to make sure that I wasn't misunderstood. When I'm talking about looking at something, if you know something is in bad shape, you know the boat's leaking and you got a real problem, you need to deal with that effectively. So my suggestion was in about 3 months, 6 months, and I'm throwing a number out there because I don't want it to be 4 years, where you start looking at the high profile should really fix that stuff as quickly as possible. And then you can start looking at the longer term stuff, which would take 2 or 3 years to see the overall impact. And that may include restoration of various bits and pieces at the same time. So I'm not advocating that we do an absolute total review of this thing in 3 months' time. What I'm suggesting is fix the obvious when the obvious becomes obvious, as opposed to letting it fester. But that's not what I put my hand up for. What I put my hand up for was related to the differential between the building code and what we've been talking about. The building code, if I understand correctly, and it was educated to me when I built the house, was related to the integral structure that you're building, whatever that might be, and the location on which you're going to place it. Okay, so basically, if you're going to build something on sand, you have to build it in one way. If you're going to build it on something else, you build it a different way. And there's rules and regulations in the building code that confine that and determine it. But it does not impact the environmental impact of where you build it. That's got nothing to do with the building code. It's a completely separate issue, and it's not linked one to the other. The fact that the building department might be able to do it is merely using people in multiple tasks. Not necessarily. So we would have to say, okay, should our building department look at the environmental impact of that build? That's a separate question from, is the building integral? They're not the same question at all. It's a question of where it is. As to whether or not it should or shouldn't be done by the county or the lower tier, the building code is done by the province, interpreted by the lower tier, and that's fine. I don't see any real reason why, if I understand the program that Mr. Stone is putting together, that it could not be done at the county level with input from the lower levels, especially when it gets into the building side of it, when it get and you talk about retrofits and so on. So I just don't have a problem with any of that, knowing that what we're going to be doing over the next 3 months to a year, considering April 1st is roughly in 3 months, or I guess 2 months now, is going to have any negative impact on moving it forward. All it's going to do is it's going to give us a better idea of where we're going. So yeah, I'm quite prepared to move forward on this.
Councillor Carter, actually, I'm thinking this might be a good point to take a bit of a timeout. I'm hearing, with an exception, that there's general support for moving forward with the bylaw, but there, as we're looking at 3 municipalities as opposed to 4, we need to talk about what's required going forward, so we can deal with that and any other points that anybody wants to make when we return. Let's say at 10:45, sorry. Okay, welcome back. I guess at this point in time, I would like to ask if, based on the discussion that we've had to this point, are there any more comments or questions or anything that anybody would like to raise? Councillor Dayu.
I am still a tiny bit stuck on this idea, I must admit, of having, if council is in agreement, having in the permit document itself, not the bylaw document, but in the permit document, a little box asking, have you thought about any offsets to the site alteration that you're thinking about doing? If so, what would it look like? Provide a little sketch, provide a timeline. If for no other reasons, then one, to remind people that this is an effective thing before they even get to the point of speaking to staff. And also then to start collecting some data for the review in a year or 2 years' time on what changes on our shorelines actually do look like, the good and the bad when it comes to shoreline health. So my interest is actually quite specifically in including that in the permit application document.
through you, Madam Chair, to the rest of the council, what I would ask is you can turn to, I guess it would be attachment 6, which is the permit application itself. And Schedule A, which allows people to actually draw their property out, I guess, and the site alteration that they're proposing. There's a number of check boxes there that we provided. So key map, boundary dimensions, approximate topography of the site, location of the natural features, proximate location of the water body. So you could add a checkbox there as well, if you want it. There's also the next page, which provides a brief descriptive overview of the site alteration project. We can add a bit to that as well, simply to say, to your words, any restorative landscaping you're planning to do, please describe it, sort of thing. So it can be done.
Will that work for what you've got in mind? So the question now is what steps do we need to follow? I guess this is to our CAO. At this point in time, if we're dealing with 3 municipalities as opposed to 4, and how would the costing be allocated based on 3 versus 4 municipalities, and what would the impact be greater on the remaining 3 than it would be if there were 4?
So I guess with respect to your first question, I would almost defer to Steve, but I think each local municipality would have to pass. So basically, we would rescind our bylaw here because the bylaw was passed here. Each local municipality that wanted to participate could pass that bylaw locally. And then just, I guess we'll look at Steve's.
If I may, Madam Chair, to rest of council. So there is a legal opinion that would appear on tab 3 of the report, and that's from John Hewitt's office. But to build on what Mike was saying, I think because this was passed for the entire geographic area of the county, you'd actually have to repeal this bylaw if you wanted to go and just deal with it in 3 of the area municipalities. So you'd actually, through a later action of council, repeal the current bylaw and then bring back a slightly reworded bylaw that specifically refers to the 3 geographic areas. And then what we would have to do then, if council did approve that, we would then have to go back to the 3 area municipalities and their councils and ask them to just do what they did, which was to agree for its enacting in their specific geographic area, and then they could go further and ask for its delegation to us. So that's if we were proceeding as it stands right now. You'd have to repeal this existing bylaw.
Councilor Burton.
Thank you, Warden. So what would happen then? I guess my question would be, if all of a sudden, and I'll use my council for example, because I do have some new members on there, decide that they don't want to go this route, and and I don't get that support. Where does that? So I suppose my question is, where does that leave the county? So then the possibility of 2 people being it, or 2 municipalities being it. Heaven forbid.
Indeed.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to the rest of council. So there can be a third option, would be to just go back and revisit this existing bylaw with all 4 municipalities and have them in to Dysart. Councillor Fury's point about implementing it locally, there still is that option as well. But you're absolutely right. It could be that second go around with the area municipalities, there may be an issue with getting a new council to support its implementation.
So then at that point, once we know who, if the municipalities who want to still participate do delegate to the county for enforcement, then we would look at the full cost of the program. We would develop the program to meet the needs of the municipalities. So we'd likely need fewer staff if we don't have all the municipalities. We'd have to figure out what that looked like. We would calculate overheads, the full cost of the program. Then we would, I would suggest meet with your staff, but certainly we would have to develop a cost sharing or a cost allocation model. That could include anything from number of permits issued and which geographic municipality they're in versus, you know, we could also include number of waterfront properties. We could allocate it in a number of different ways, but the full cost of the program would be borne by the municipalities that were participating, including overhead costs. So there's sort of a next step that we would have to go through. Once we know who's participating, we would then create the program or recommend a program that would meet the needs of those participating municipalities. And then we would develop a cost sharing model for that.
There was a question raised during the break about how it would be handled. For instance, as Councillor Burton has mentioned, he's an hour's drive away. And you know, how would that be calculated if for instance, you were going to inspect a property in Minden? There's less time and distance and cost involved than if you were going to Highlands East or to Oxtown Lake, for that matter. And you know, the question was, how would that be calculated somehow or considered, as opposed to these are the number of inspections that we did? Like there's another factor that would need to be calculated.
I'm, you know, it gets a little challenging to do it that way. If you can just picture your building permit process, if you were charging them different amounts based on the distance from the municipal office or your building department office, that's a little challenging to do. But we could, you know, invoice this at the end of a year. So you would basically be able to calculate costs by municipality. So if, as an example, if there were 100 permits in, I'm just really rough, I'm just hypothetical numbers here, but we're using hypothetical numbers. But if there were 100 permits in Highlands East and 100 permits in Algonquin Highlands and 200 permits in Minden Hills, you could allocate that back and say, okay, well, 50% of the cost of the program, including overhead, would be charged to Minden Hills, 25% to Highlands East, and 25% to Algonquin Highlands. Again, you could do part of it based on that and part of it based on number of waterfront properties. And there's any number of ways you can create a formula to recover all those costs. And, you know, I think it would really just be a question of rolling up the sleeves with staff and coming up with a recommendation. I'm pretty sure we could do that.
Councillor Fury, then Councillor Rao.
I don't know why we need to complicate that. Why don't we just do it on the basis of your apportionment of assessment? If Algonquin Highlands is 14%, they pay 14% of the overall cost of the shoreline bylaw. That to me is simple, instead of trying to, like, that's almost going to create another half a job.
But what if we have twice as many?
Well,
permit
you will,
applications
but
and-
you won't because of your number of users, I don't think. Like, I don't know, but I know one thing on behalf of Dysart, that if we're contributing nearly 40%, and Minden Hills is 20-some%, and we were both out, we would want that deleted from the from the cost.
Yeah, it would, assessment is something we could do, but we would have to discount the assessment of whoever's not.
Yeah,
in
that's simple.
In the calculation, for sure.
See, that's where, in my way of thinking, it would be better to be based on the number of permit applications that you had, which is clean. Councillor Rael?
I understand the operating cost, which is the ongoing costs and how that's going to work. My concern is the developmental cost, where we are right now and where we're going to be over the next 3-6 months, whatever it takes to get this thing done. Those costs, such as how we're going to put it together. If that is going to be divided amongst the municipalities that are going to partake in it, and the one that doesn't, or two that doesn't, depending on how this works out, don't. Do they have a buy-in at the end of this thing? Because my next door neighbor, when we had this thing, I had to put power into where we live. So we bought a communal power source. And the whole point is that it's divided amongst the people who participated. At the end of it, when it was all said and done, the power was free on the pole. They wanted power. Well, they didn't get power because they had to cross my property in order to get there. So they had to pay their equal share in order to get that power. My question is, and I don't think Dysart would do that, and I hope Highlands East would never do that. But at the end of the day, the developmental costs have yet to be completed. We haven't finished doing the stuff that we need to do yet. Is that part of the operation? Is that going to be divided, just paid by council, and we're all going to pay for that? Or is that also going to be divided by the number of people that partake?
Ultimately, council would make those decisions. But I mean, those are certainly considerations we can take into account as we develop a recommendation to bring back.
At this point, we're all paying, whatever our portion is. And I would think if Dysart opts out at this point in time, but determines at a later date that they want to opt in, I can't see anybody saying that no, because it's in everyone's best interest that we all do this. And you had mentioned like the time it takes for us to sort this out. I think we've all kind of agreed that the rationale for April the 1st was to give us sufficient time to have this conversation, come to some agreement, but also have something in place before the construction season starts. People know that this is in place and that, that this is what's required before they can do any more work. So if we leave it, we're losing a year if we leave it any longer than that. Okay, so I'm Councillor Dayu.
Sounds like there's some really key pieces to be worked out. Could you tell us a bit about implications for the budget timeline for county? Can this be done in parallel to that?
Oh, absolutely. I think what I would suggest is if that is how council directs us to proceed, I would meet with your staff right away. In terms of the county budget, we would take any, anything that was in there because it would become a net zero. So we would remove anything, how can I say this? Anything that's in the budget that wouldn't be offset with a revenue would be removed because we would net zero our budget and then just invoice the 3 participating or 2 participating, whatever it is, should we go that way. So it's a pretty simple change in our budget. My recollection, and this is simply my recollection, is that the vast majority of the expenses were being funded from reserves because we had budgeted to start in previous years and not done that. That money was transferred to reserves. And so there wouldn't be a significant reduction in the levy per se this year. But it would certainly impact future years.
Do you have a question, Councillor Burton?
No, I was just going to say exactly what Mike had just said, that it's going to maybe not affect us too much this year, but by all means, next year, it's going to be quite a bit different. What they're using the reserves.
Any other comments that anybody wants to make at this point in time? Because I'm about to, Mr. Stone.
Just on the funding approach, there was mentioned about the looking at permits. I would say it's probably better to look at a funding model based on the number of shoreline properties within each municipality. Because at the end of the day, this is a bylaw that we will be looking at compliance with. So we may not issue permits, but we may be involved a lot on the enforcement side of things, which don't require permits. So I don't think issuance of permits is necessarily a good barometer of activity that could happen, because it is a regulatory tool, and permits is just a side component of it. So that's my only comment there.
So going forward, I'm thinking, and you can tell me, Mr. Clerk and CAO, if I'm right. It sounds like, first of all, we need to have a vote to determine whether or not we're going to go forward with the existing bylaw. And if there is an out, then we would need to have another vote to determine whether we're going to redraft the bylaw for the remaining municipalities. Or can that all be done in one vote?
So I don't know that there's a vote required at all, actually, other than, so what we did was we passed the bylaw, but we knew that we were actually premature in passing that bylaw because we hadn't been delegated the authority from the local municipalities to do it.
But we have been by 3 now.
But we have by 3. So, but clearly the intent was to have all 4 participate, because the bylaw itself applied to the 4 municipalities. So I guess once we still don't have a definitive answer from Dysart, although I suspect I know the answer, but we don't have a definitive answer from Dysart. So I think we need to wait for a definitive answer from Dysart, a yes or no. That will then, it will come back. At that point, we know that the bylaw needs to be repealed. And then we need to take a different approach. We either need to submit a different bylaw, or it needs to be passed individually at the 3 local municipalities. So I don't think we need any vote at this point. We need a final answer from Dysart on whether or not they want to participate. And then once we have that, that will show the path forward.
And in the meantime, you can work on various calculations with respect to financing.
Yeah, I would suggest I would start those conversations with the staff from the 3 now, just so that we can, be ready in the event that those are required, and come up with the most, I guess, a recommendation for our councils to consider in terms of cost allocation. And part of that would be having, Director Stone, come up with a staffing model for just the 3 municipalities, and then once we can put a dollar figure to that, then we can go forward.
Councillor Carter, did I see your hand up? Okay, so it sounds like it sounds like you're going to be able to meet your timeline today. Are there any other comments, any other concerns that anybody wants to bring up? So what I'm hearing now, it's in your court to come back to us with a definitive yay or nay, that you've had a chance to talk about it, and then we can go forward with whatever we've got, working you in or out.
I'd just like to say that I've been down here for too long, 40 years almost, and I've never ever seen anything that was so controversial as this bylaw. And I think it's because it appears that it's complicated to understand, and it appears like it's kind of infringing on how it's interpreted. It's kind of infringing on people's rights that they've traditionally had. I don't agree with that, but in most cases. But I would just say that this is not personal from me or from Walt. This is a feeling, this is what we're hearing from taxpayers. And I think you just went through an election and you saw some of it as well. So I think there is a lot of miscommunication or bad information that's out there that
Whether it's right or wrong.
whether it's right or wrong, and that's the world we're in today, but there's certainly nothing personal about this for us. I don't think I've ever voted against anything that I thought was for the better good of the county. But I happen to believe there's another way of doing it that's better and cheaper. And I like Mr. Stone's third option of doing it at a local level. But anyway, that'll be up to everybody else. Thank you.
I have to, I have to agree with you that it has been, for the time that I've been on council, the most controversial thing that we have done. It has created a reaction that I found rather surprising. I didn't realize that there was such a nasty underbelly to the county. It's there. And it seems to me that it's something that's pervasive across the country, and it's unfortunate. But anyway, we shall move forward with, I can see a couple of hands here. Councillor Burton and Councillor Rail.
I was just going to comment on the comment you made. We were trying to do it for the right reason.
Yep. Councillor Rail.
Yeah, I'm kind of hoping that at the end of the day, because a lot of the questions that I've been asked by my constituents is how's it going to work, blah, 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 and all the good things that go along with making this happen. It looks like it may be the end of February before we get all of the information back from the various municipalities on where we stand on this thing. I'm hoping that we do not bring this project to a halt and wait a month while we're getting that information. I'm hoping that Steve will be able to continue investigating. And why am I asking that? Because that'll give me better answers to the people that I represent as to where we are now. So here's some more information that we didn't have 2-3 months ago when we first voted on this thing. And here's some of the information that we hopefully will be able to present over whatever period of time it takes to put it together. So I'm kind of hoping that we continue working on this, at least on the basic part of it, because even if it became a local level, we're still going to face the same problems, whether we address it as a county or we address it as a municipality. So I would hope that Steve is going to continue investigating the things that he's working on.
That's the plan.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say is I wouldn't recommend that we move forward hiring staff until we know how many we need, who they're serving, that's a part of it I wouldn't recommend we move forward with, but I heard Councillor Ferry's comment and we don't disagree. Hiring staff is a challenge. And so one of the things that, Steve and I have had some conversation about is, one of my biggest fears is we get a bylaw in place and have trouble finding that staff person to actually enforce it. So we will do our best. We'll turn over every rock, but there's a risk there, no question.
That was one of the points I was going to raise is the issue of staffing, because at this point in time, we're not 100% positive what we're going to need. I was happy to hear you, talk about your abilities and Adam's abilities, and but there's going to be a point of time with, if we don't have staff, how are we going to manage it? The longer we go on with the process and try and figure out what we're doing, the more challenging it's going to become. Councillor Dayu.
And to that point, I do look forward to hearing back from your conversations with lower tier staff, because if there are opportunities which are reasonable for our building and bylaw folk to take on some piece of this as part of their normal going about business, I would like to hear about that. And I stress the word reasonable. But speaking as a representative of the lower tier municipality with the fewest taxpayers, I am daunted by the idea that the municipality with one of the highest taxpayer base may not be joining us, because I think for Algonquin Highlands, that's going to have a very serious impact on our budget in some way. So in order to keep this alive, I'd really like to see how we can combine those functions to the best of our ability and reduce cost to the best of our ability. Our budget at Algonquin Highlands, our draft budget is due in 4 days, and I am worried. I'm very worried.
Well, and there's also the question about whether they have the capacity to take on more work, because we've all got, there's challenges within our bylaw departments. Councillor McKechnie.
Yeah, I just want all of Dysart's taxpayers who are watching today to understand that Murray and I are not putting our head in the sand in regard to this issue. And we do have a lot of conversation about it, and there is some plans in place. And we're very positive about the direction that we might be going in. And we only wish that we had more participants coming on our side. And we're not here to, try to divide us or anything like that. We're listening to our people, and there's a lot of thought gone into this, believe me. So I just want all the ratepayers out there in Dysart to realize that Murray and I really do care about our shorelines, and we will be doing everything in our power to make them make it even better. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carter.
There's a saying about perfect being the enemy of the good. This last number of years has been, almost the perfect example of that. People complaining about it's not being done the right way, or people complaining that something's not in it, or whatever. I'm extremely disappointed in where we're turning out, particularly since, as I mentioned last time, I'm downriver from Dysart, and so anything that happens in Dysart is going to come into Minden. So I'm very, very concerned about that. And the whole idea of trying to work together, not every optimal solution is going to be perfect. And we try to work to some consensus, try to work to some consideration, try to work to some agreement where we can actually accomplish something in a reasonable period of time. Because if we continue to try to strive for getting perfect, we'll never get anything done. So this is my general feelings.
Councillor Rail and Councillor Fury.
I just have one question, and that's more or less exactly what Councillor Dayu was thinking, and that is that I think the smaller tiers, and we're right not far from where you are. So at the end of the day, is there a option whereby, say, a municipality like ours, which is again one of the smaller ones, could we not pass a resolution that we would, just pushing this out here, subject to approval subject to finance? Because if we find out that it's going to double the cost to our municipality to partake without one of us, then that may be economically not viable, whereas we have to start looking at the overall program. So I don't know if we'll have the numbers on the finance prior to that, or how's it going to work? Because if we get our council to vote in and say, yeah, there's no problem, and then at the end of the day, we find out that our share of it's going to be 250 grand a year, that may not be the smartest move for our municipality. Not that we don't want the bylaw, we just can't afford it.
I think there was a comment from our CAO that it should work out pretty much as a wash to where we are now, but I think there's a little bit of work to be done with respect to that.
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if you're considering the bylaw or considering how you're going to move forward with the bylaw at the local municipality, that you would put in a provision in your resolution saying subject to coming to an agreement that's acceptable around cost allocation or cost sharing. I would absolutely do that. I think it's really tough to sit here and just, sort of figure out how the new program is going to compare cost allocation wise or proportionately to the original one that we envisioned. But I suspect will require less staff because the municipality with the most properties and the most waterfront properties is no longer participating. So I assume we'll need less staff than we originally had envisioned. And so I really can't say how it will all wash out, but certainly the costs will be a lot less because Dysart isn't participating. There's no question about that in my mind.
But adding that, sort of clause to your resolution would protect your municipality and your budget. Councillor Fury.
Well, I just want to assure Councillor Carter that I don't want to send him bad water. And I'm sure he doesn't want to send any bad water from his township, and he's got the same concern. So we're on the same page there. And we will work to make sure we're not sending that kind of water.
Okay, any other comments, questions, concerns at this point in time? So staff have direction about the information we're looking for, where we would appreciate, receiving the response from Dysart as quickly as we can, because there's a lot of kind of moving parts. So if I could have a mover and a seconder then to receive this information. Councillor Royale. Seconded. Councillor Shell, thank you.
Moved by Councillor Ryle, seconded by Councillor Shell. Be it resolved that Haliburton County Council received the planning report PLN 12-2023 entitled Shoreline Preservation Bylaw 4123.
All in favor? That's carried. And a mover and a seconder for the confirming bylaw for today. Councillor Fury. Councillor Burton.
Moved by Councillor Fury, seconded by Councillor Burton. Be it resolved that bylaw 4148 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the January 30th, 2023 special meeting of Haliburton County Council be considered be read a first, second, third time, finally passed, and the seal of the corporation be affixed.
All in favor? That's carried. And finally, a motion to adjourn. Councillor McKechnie, Councillor Carter. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor McKechnie, seconded by Councillor Carter. Be it resolved that the January 30th, 2023 special meeting of Haliburton County Council be adjourned.
All in favor? That's carried. Thank you, everyone.